Greetings, YouTube. Paying no attention to the cat in the window. I have a question. Do you like magic shops? I've always been fond of magic shops. Not necessarily magic shops like a Walmart of magic items. No, I tend to think of them more along the lines of like antique stores. Now, if you go to colloquial local antique stores, you will find a plethora of things that aren't technically antiques. You'll find there are high-end antique stores out there which only deal within very high cost, very valuable things, that are 100 plus years old. But there are lots of places that are essentially renting out little booths. They're called antique malls, and the person can sell anything they want through that. And so you can find all kinds of strange things. I've bought power tools, bought measuring instruments, I've bought DVDs, books, dinner plates. I've bought all kinds of things that some of them were vintage, some of them were antiques, but some of them, being the power tools, were fairly new. I mean, it was a Makita impact driver. It worked wonderfully. It's a little beat up, but it works exactly as it's supposed to. I took a gamble on it because it didn't have a battery, but I thought 12 bucks was worth it, and I bought an impact driver for $12. Awesome. But that's the kind of thing I think of magic shops as. And my favorite magic shop that I've used more than once is a guy named Otto. Now, Otto's Oddities is actually something I've used in both science fiction and fantasy, as science fiction in post-apocalyptic. Let me specify that. A post-apocalyptic setting, as well as in high fantasy campaigns. And Otto is just that. He is an odd person. And sometimes he plays a great deal of import in a story, in a background. And sometimes he is just a bit of a weirdo that likes to deal with items. Now, my favorite iteration of Otto was in a high fantasy campaign that dealt with the players is looking for both some place to buy and sell things, but mostly sell things. And Otto was always in the market for buying weird stuff. And he had very weird stuff. And it didn't take long for the folks to realize that he had weirder stuff than you might otherwise expect, even in a high fantasy world. And as they grew closer and closer to Otto, and he became not only a shopkeeper, but an important NPC and a friend of the group, he eventually pulled them into his circle and told them that, I'm going to be confiding you because something's happened to my assistant and I need more help than I am capable of achieving on my own. And over the course of that, they discovered that he was, I believe Otto was human, but he had a rather extended lifespan. Don't know if I ever explained that, but he did. And he'd had an earlier career as a second story man. But then he got into magic, and he had gotten quite talented at magic. But then he decided that he didn't want to adventure anymore, but he had a taste for the exotic. And one of the reasons he had the taste for an exotic is because he found a gate, an honest to goodness gate that he was able to transport into the basement of his shop and set back up. Now, he had no real control over the gate. He could look at the gate and he could go through the gate, but he could not choose where the gate went. And in fact, the gate went where it wanted every 14 minutes. Every 14 minutes, the location of what the gate was looking at went away, and a new one came in. And it wasn't just a viewing port, you could walk through it. And when you walked through it, the gate was invisible from the other side, though there was nothing preventing anyone else from walking through the gate. They just wouldn't see it. And it was often not necessarily well hidden or anything. It was just where you were when you went through. And because of this, he was able to raid other dimensions on a regular basis and pull back interesting things. Now, some things he pulled back were just valuables, gems and gold and things like that, jewelry that he used to further his lifestyle. He lived a rather extravagant lifestyle. He was known for having good tastes in everything because he could afford to have good taste in everything. And he had an assistant, which was essentially it was an animated skeleton that he had found a way of coating it in mithril. So it looked like a mithril skeleton. It was a lizard person, and it was programmed to essentially be his bodyguard and to be his retrieval process. So he had set up a timer, and when the timer got a certain light went off, the assistant, the skeleton, would haul on a rope that had been attached to Otto, his body harness. So he would essentially fish himself into these other dimensions, walk in, pick stuff up. He would be smart. He'd have himself covered in an invisibility spell. Get in there, do what he needed to do, get pulled out just in case he was knocked unconscious or he got lost in, he got lost time or something, and then he would be safe. It was very risky. He had tried sending in, other kinds of, animatronic kind of things and never had a great deal of success. It was, it's essentially sending in an unmanned robotic system, little robot underwater thing. Yeah, you can do certain things with those, but they're not quite the same as being there to make the judgment calls you need. And none of these things had the dexterity of a guy who used to be a second story man. So he often went through there and found things and pulled them back. And in fact, he actually had at one point found Fort Knox and alleviated them of some gold. Let me take that off your hands. They're very confused about how that happened. So the people in the U.S. were like, how did someone steal gold out of Fort Knox and we have absolutely no breach of security? Because Otto showed up and shoved a bunch of bars into a bag of holding and then jumped back through that gate. So he had used that as to help fuel the building of literally the building of the structure that was over the gate, because he owned the entire structure himself. And that kind of shop is what I loved. So he would sell strange things, both mundane and magical, some of which he didn't have 100% idea what they did, because he had some skill at, casting detect magic, but he also wasn't foolish. And there were things he was not willing to test because he felt it put himself at a risk. Because while he was not evil, he most definitely was chaotic neutral. And while he was deeply attached to the group and he would never have betrayed them, he was also very self-centered and he wouldn't necessarily put himself at risk for nothing. The issue that he needed the party with is that one of his assistants went missing and he couldn't find her. And he used every resource he had at his disposal and he still couldn't find her. And that's when he got very worried, because if he didn't have the resources to find her, something had gone very bad. They did eventually find her. Happy ending. But that's the kind of shop I like. Freaky places that are very antique shoppy, kind of places where you find weird stuff and you're never going to know what you're going to find when you walk in the door. As far as like potions and scrolls, yeah, you can find those probably pretty common. Potions are going to be available at like temples, at apothecary shops, of course at alchemist shops, as well as low-level scrolls are probably going to be churned out by some mages, low-level, what are they called? The NPC class of, was it mage? I can't remember what they call them. There was I think it was from Eberron, there was a class that was an NPC, low-level arcane caster, and they did a lot of things like that. They just did the piddly assistant stuff that higher powered spellcasters needed. And they can turn out, first and second level scrolls on a regular basis. You want something higher than that, you're going to have to actually talk to somebody who's going to make it custom for you. As well as armor, you're going to be able to find people who can make very basic magic armor for you, because there are abilities like in Pathfinder First Edition for a non-spellcaster to empower magic items because they have the right feat selection. So they can actually make armor and weapons that have magical abilities, maybe even some enchantments beyond just a bonus and durability and things like that. But for the really strange things, you're going to have to go to one of these little odd antique shops. And for the really weird stuff, you're going to have to do research and find out if this thing actually exists. And if it does actually exist, where was the last time anybody saw it? And that's an adventure in and of itself. You're now hunting down a magic item that you think was lost over in that mountain range while being carried by, so-and-so and who never came home. So now you have to go figure out what happened to them and why didn't they come home and can you get the thing back if it still exists, that kind of stuff. Um, so I like magic shops. I don't necessarily want to have a chain of them. I don't mind like having Aurora's whole world catalog style chain of stores, that they're dealing in mundane and alchemical stuff. I have no problem with that. But when it comes to like the more powerful magic items, I think that they should be found in the really freaky little corner antique style shops, unless and also you have them custom made. Yes, I've got this cool magic armor. It's got a +1 enchantment on it. I want you to make it more powerful, and here's a list of things I'd like you to put on it as well. Or you go there and say, hey, these are the situations I find myself in. Can you make a recommendation of what you think my armor should have on it to keep me alive so I can come back and be your patron again? So let's talk about magic shops. Do you like them? Do you not like them? Do you prefer low magic where there's such a thing doesn't even enter into the possibility, the realm of the possible? Or do you like chains of, McMagic items on every corner and you have no problem with everyone walking around with a +1 sword, if they're right fresh out of, fighter college, that kind of stuff. So let's talk about magic shops.